Thanks to our sponsors Renault. The Renault Capture, the versatile compact family SUV.
You're still the one I run to, the one that I belong to. You're still the one I want for life.
A grain of rice, a grain of rice is going to tip the scale. Just remember that, lad.
There's a small bit of a needle there.
Come on, Mayo, you've got to get Andy Moran into the game.
Listen victory, and now they're really roaring. And I can tell you that there won't be a cow milk in County Clare for at least a week.
Hello everyone, you're very welcome to the Irish Examiner Gaelic Football Show in association with Renault. Today we are previewing the All-Ireland final between Kerry and Galway. My name is Paul Rouse and I'm joined by the former Armagh footballer Oisín McConville, by the former Kerry footballer Bryan Sheehan, by the former Kerry footballer and manager Éamonn Fitzmaurice, and by the former Galway footballer and manager Kevin Walsh. We're just going to get straight into this. So Bryan, what team will Kerry play on Sunday?
I can't see too many changes, to be honest, from the point of view of, look, you've got this far with the same team, I don't think, and I think Éamonn and maybe Kevin might be able to confirm this, but I don't think you're going to change your team massively. You're 2 weeks out from the last game. It's pointless going making wholesale changes unless you have to. And I suppose the only question mark at the moment is the availability of Gavin White. It's been kept very quiet on here at the moment, so I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But other than that, I think it's going to be more or less on the same lines. I can't see anyone from the semi-final that stuck up their hand that would say that maybe is pushing to get starting. I think Darragh Moynihan came on. I thought he made a big impact when he came on, in fairness. That's one possibility. Other than that, I think Killian Spillane didn't do enough for me when he came in. I think Paul Geaney will hold his place. And I think just with the stage of the game, from the point of view of that, the attention that David Clifford and Sean O'Shea are going to get, I think we need big game players. I think Paul is kind of one of those fellas you feel is going to step up to the plate at the weekend. So from that point of view, I think they were the only places that really were up for grabs. If Gavin White is out, and I was kind of thinking about this during the week, how would you go about it? And again, I probably came back to the same thing. There's a part of me kind of saying that I think Galway will be defensive. I think they're going to have to mind the house. They're not going to go for a shootout with Kerry. And I think they saw the impact that David Clifford and Sean O'Shea can have if you leave them one-on-one with their men and if you give them the space that Dublin gave them and the damage they can do. Plus, I think Galway's setup all year has been quite defensive as well. So, do Kerry decide to put someone a bit more attacking-minded at wing back and maybe try and punish Galway that direction? It's a possibility, but again, look, you're 2 weeks out from an Ireland final. I don't think we're going to go tinkering with your formation or tinkering with your game plan that much. So I think it's probably going to be Paul Murphy. I would imagine if Gavin's out.
If you were going to play an attacking player there, not that Paul Murphy isn't capable of attacking as well, but if you were going to play somebody else there, who would you play?
Like, it's an option you have. I mean, you could possibly put someone like Darragh Moynihan or even Adrian Spillane in there from the point of view. They're both good defensive players. They both do a lot of work around place, good tacklers. I think possibly the one thing that might come into play is what Kerry are going to do with the Galway kickouts. If Kerry are going to push in the Galway kickouts and force Galway long, Galway are big around the middle of the field. Paddy Kelly and Johnny Heaney are two big men as well. And it might be a mismatch if Paul Murphy is there. Something that might happen depending on what happens. So I think, look, again, you see the problem is you've only 2 weeks. And even that, the 2 weeks are very short. It's very short space of time to go changing and working on tactics. And probably, maybe 3 training sessions. Probably Thursday, Sunday, half an hour of competitive ball on the Tuesday evening. I don't think it's going to be that much that they can work on. So
would you change the midfield at all? Would you make any change to the midfield?
I wouldn't. No, I wouldn't. I thought both players did fine. I thought David, if anything, was probably taken off a fraction too early the last day. I thought there was another 5-10 minutes in him at least. But look, conditions was very warm down there. The intensity of the game was well higher than what it was in the Mayo game. So they just probably felt that the legs, he hadn't enough in the legs to keep going. But I probably wouldn't. I think I'll leave it there. I think they might match up Paul Conroy or Jack Barry on Paul Conroy, and because he has had an influence in the Galway team for the last while, so it's something I think they'll probably put him on Paul Conroy to see if they can keep him quiet, because he's been Rob is one of the main players in the championship this year, kicking big scores at big times as well. So he's good in the air. So I think that's something they might just stick with that and leave Dermot O'Connor in the wing. Look, again, I suppose the reason being, I don't think you're going to make 3 changes going into an All-Ireland final. If you're being enforced with 1 with Gavin White, I can't see Kerry making 2 or 3 changes, 1 midfield and 1 half forward line. I just don't think it's going to happen. So I think the team will stay relatively the same, with the exception of whether they'll just slot Paul Murphy straight in wing back, or whether they're going to kind of maybe think outside the box here and put someone maybe a bit more. Again, they might go with some of Adrian's plan, who's big and aggressive, and that. Or look, again, I've been thinking about it the whole time, but Gavin White was massive to the Kerry defence. I think, as much as I kind of said before, I felt his distribution of the ball or his decision making in the final third was lacking. Defensively, I thought he was excellent for Kerry. If Tadhg Morley ever double teamed anyone, or Tadhg Morley went and pushed on his man, or went to double team in a corner, or Gavin tucked in, and he always protected the top of the D, and he was also very quick to get back out again to his man, and that was a great reading. So again, maybe for playing a forward in that instinct, do they have the same instinct to tuck in defensively? Whereas Paul Murphy, I think, would, and I think Paul Murphy would have probably played that role as well in training if anyone was missing. So look, I think if Gavin's out, I think the only change would probably be Paul Murphy. Other than that, I wouldn't go changing the team.
What do you think of that team, Éamonn?
No, I agree. Everything Bryan said there, I wouldn't disagree with any of it. Paul, I think the couple of things that are up for grabs, obviously, is if Gavin White isn't fit, as Bryan said, and the other thing then is that that's one decision to be made. Paul Murphy, most likely. I think Jack would like to have a balance of experience, and winning experience. A couple of lads that have won All-Irelands before, that they're on the pitch as well, and that can count for a lot on All-Ireland final day. I don't think they're going to go with 6 offensive forwards either, which is probably their other option with the 10 slot, possibly to play the likes of a Dara Moynihan instead of Dermot O'Connor there, or put Dermot to midfield and hold Jack Barry or David. I don't think they're going to do that. The system that they've had all year has worked very well for them. So similar to Bryan, I can't see too many changes. I think if there's normally you'd be in a bit more of a vacuum. If there was 4 weeks to final, and training form can have an effect in it, and fellas can come in and get out of form, but in a 2-week turnaround, it's very short for some fella to put up his hand. So I expect very much similar team, very similar to what Bryan said there.
The 2 forwards that struggled against Dublin most of all were Stephen O'Brien and Paul Ganey. Would you hold on to them on the team?
Yeah, like I said, for that reason, for both from their ability point of view, I'd expect both of them to really respond the next day out. They'll be anxious to get back on the pitch, and they'll be anxious to right the wrongs. And rarely do players have 2 bad games in a row. At this stage of the season, when fellas are of that caliber of player, and the experience factor is huge. I know a lot of the lads were involved in the All-Ireland final 3 years ago, and the replay, so that they've played in 2 All-Ireland finals already, and they've got, good experience from that. But unfortunately, it was a losing experience, whereas, Dave Moran, Stephen, Paul Ganey, Paul Murphy, they have the experience of having won an All-Ireland in 2014, and that counts. That counts on the big day. And for that reason, Jack thinks of everything, and he will be thinking of the balance of the team and that balance of experience as well. So, I expect the boys to start, and both of them are well suited to the challenge that Galway are going to present as well. So I think that will possibly be a factor in the management's decision making as well.
We'll talk about the matchups in a minute. In terms of both teams, Oisín, is that Kerry team that the lads have picked there, is that good enough to win an All-Ireland final?
Yeah, I think it is, but I actually think if that leaves David Moore on McDaid, I don't think that's a matchup that would spring to mind immediately. I wonder, would Kerry slightly tinker with with that midfield. I wonder, would they play Mourne and would they play O'Connor as opposed to Jack Barry? David Moore's not going to last, 75, 80 minutes. I think that's the obvious thing. And then the question mark comes: do you start him, or is it somebody you would like to bring on to have on the ball towards the end of the game? He come back. I thought he was very good against Mayo. Not so good the last day. Give up a couple of vital possessions as well. So there is definitely a question mark. Is that good enough to win an All-Ireland? Yeah. I don't think there's a big pile between these two teams. I think that Kerry, Galway, it's going to be not the game that we've been used to watching down through the years. I don't think. I think as much as Bryan says that Galway are going to sit in, I think Kerry will sit in a bit as well, or a lot. I think when they look at the form that Comer's in from the last day, I mean, like it brings on a whole new importance to Tadhg Morley's role, as far as, doubling up in those situations, especially on Comer, if it's going to be Foley on Comer. So, but yeah, that Kerry team's good enough to win, but I still think there's a few question marks. Like, I mean, the form of Stephen O'Brien and Geaney, has to be a worry as much as, you would expect him to step up. And Geaney is always, usually always stepped up in the big games. So, but there's still question marks around him. And there still has to be, what do you do as a manager? Do you keep going, yeah, he's nearly there. It's this is the day that it could happen for him. Or do you say, listen, you've had 2, 3, 4 chances, it hasn't quite happened for you yet. Maybe it's time to shake this thing up a little bit. And would it be fair to say, lads, that Jack would normally pull one rabbit out of the hat, or he would usually do something a little bit different when it comes to this stage of the year? So the one that I keep coming back to is, maybe he's tempted just to play the two lads, O'Connor and Jack Barry in the middle of the field and hold David Moore. And that might mean that Moynihan might play in the half-forward line, which I think the form he is in, the way he's had an impact on the game, might not be the worst thing in the world for Kerry.
Yeah, possibly, Oisín. Possibly he does. I think one of Jack's biggest strengths is he traditionally at this time of the season, as you come towards the end game, he gets a lot of the calls right. His kind of sixth sense around how players are going, like exactly what you said there. Do I give a guy another go, or do I pull a rabbit out of a hat? I think in general, when you go back over the years, he's got a lot of those calls right. Think back to the 2004 final. He pulled Johnny Crowley out of the hat and started him in that game, and Johnny Crowley had a great game in that final. And he's done things like that at different stages down through the years, and in general, it has worked out. So I kind of trust his sixth sense on that, but I think the team will be obviously named Friday evening. We'll probably know for sure just before throwing in Sunday, but it wouldn't surprise me if he did pull a rabbit out of a hat. But I think there has been a very consistent team selection going back to last January in the McGrath Cup, and a very consistent approach, and it's got him this far. I can't see them changing too much, but at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised. And he has done that for finals in the past, where he has pulled, tried something different for a final to surprise the opposition. But the time is less between the two games in terms of actually working on something different and training and that kind of thing. So the practicality side of it, you'd be saying, I'd be surprised if there's anything too different about Kerry on Sunday.
Yeah, that Kerry probably have to think about picking the two lads up in the middle of the field. They probably have to think about picking Conroy up because of his threat, and McDade, who is an unbelievable athlete, really is.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Like Bryan said, I could see it going both ways. I could see Jack Barry being given a job on Conroy, similar to the Fenton kind of role, but I could also see him getting that role on McDade, and David and Conroy ploughing away with each other. They're similar type players. They're similar vintage. and that David would have to get wired into Conroy off the ball, because look, one of Conroy's biggest strengths is coming late, thinking like a half forward, and timing his run and getting into those pockets of space. So in that kind of a situation, David wouldn't be able to drop or wouldn't be able to help out Tadhg Morley. He'd be just basically wired into to Conroy once Galway are in possession. So I'd see it maybe the matchup more like that David would wire into Conroy and Jack would be on Killian McDade because of McDade's athleticism. And McDade in the championship has actually scored, I'd say he's probably scored more than Paul Conroy from play, because of, he got the goal against Armagh, he's got a couple of points. Yeah. So that's kind of the way I'd expect it to go.
Kevin, do you see there being no change to the Galway team?
No, I think it'll be solid, Paul. I don't see any change. I do expect Moran to take up Conroy. I think there'll be no question about that. I think they'll suit each other to a degree, and it'll be a battle in the air as well. I'd expect that Barry will be after McDade all day. That's the way I see it. I'd expect that's what'll happen. I don't see any changes, Paul. There hasn't been any changes. Even subs the last day, I don't think anyone came on until the last few minutes. So I'd expect that they go exactly what they had. And with the same system and style, I don't see them leaving themselves open at the back. I've said this in the last few podcasts. You could see them back to the Clare National League game. So I don't see them changing it that way. I suppose the difference they have here now is that they're going to have to try and get a fast break. And while I think the opposition for the last two games won't be as strong as the Kerry one, so they're going to have to try and get their way of leaving up one or two players. The whole first half, there was 15 were behind the halfway line, so it's fine using the defence like that, but how are you going to get your fast break? So I think, having more than a +1 in the back behind your defensive arc, is drawing back the forwards. That's the problem. So if you have a +2 or 3 at the back, now you've got yardage in your defensive arc that splits open slightly. So you've got to use your top 2 forwards to come back, and that's what's happening, what I can see at the minute. Robert Fairnty was back on the 14-yard line, defended the last day. That's not where he needs to be. But again, it's finding that balance of not conceding too many early scores, but also being able to transition. So that's I suppose the little worry with this full system at the minute I see. But I don't see many changes, Paul, to be honest.
And which dressing room would you prefer to be in on Sunday?
The winning one, obviously.
Which group of players would you prefer to have at your disposal?
Too many other ones, but look at Paul. To be honest, there's huge challenges for both players before they go next Sunday, and look at the Kerry challenge is huge as well, because I know you're saying be down to earth and like that stuff, but I mean there was such a big game against Dublin, to get over that line was huge for me, and that was huge for Kerry as well, even for confidence wise. But it brings another challenge, and that's meeting people on the street every single day, and like Bryan, Éamonn, you know, and Kerry. It'll be a tough one, but you'll win it, type of thing. And that they'll be listening to that all week. No matter how you look at it, they will be listening to that. And it's almost like trying to keep out that mist out of your face. And it's probably easier to organise the Galway dressing room than will be the Kerry one, to be honest. But the Kerry dressing room obviously has the form. So, like the Division 1 champions, unbeaten. If you take the Mayo, the only line you can take on form is actually Mayo. Both teams have met Mayo this year. And if you want to go on the horsey route for the Galway race coming up, you'd have to say the form is an 8-point loss for Mayo against Kerry. It's 1 point against Galway. They won the National League quite easily. And also, Durkin wasn't actually there to mark Shane Welsh when they played in the Connacht final. So if you don't want to break it down that way, you'd be saying the Kerry dressing room has the form. But to manage the players, it's probably easier to manage the Galway dressing room at the minute.
Bryan, I was in Dublin in the middle of last week. There was a woman walking down the street in front of me wearing this big T-shirt which said Kerry 38 on it. And she appeared to be announcing the imminent arrival of a 38 All-Ireland football title. Is that what the mood in Kerry is?
Depends who you talk to. I think the real football people around here at the moment know that it's a massive game, that this, just because you beat Dublin doesn't guarantee you winning the All-Ireland. Look, I think Dublin, to be honest, you have come back into the pack. So as much as Kerry beat Dublin, you're after beating a Dublin team that's after being relegated to Division 2, hadn't played particularly well all year, and we're missing Conor Callan. So I just think there's a bit of perspective of where Kerry are coming to the All-Ireland. Just because you beat Dublin, I think the big thing for Kerry was beating Dublin to get the monkey off the back. I think because we hadn't beaten them since 2009, it was just a massive occasion for Kerry. And I think, some people maybe that wouldn't have followed or have the knowledge of football would be thinking, it's only a matter of Kerry turning up and beating Galway. But look, when's the last time anyone walked into an All-Ireland final and walked away with it? It doesn't happen. Any team that goes to an All-Ireland final is there on merit. And look, it's going to be a very, very difficult game, because for me, Galway are probably the one team that have improved with every game they've played this year. They've found something that they were poor on. They've tweaked this, they've worked on it, and they've just gotten better and better and better and better. So going back to the question, Paul, some people I think might be just thinking after beating Dublin, it's the 38 All-Ireland. But I tell you, from a person that has been involved in playing football since I've been at the age of 15 at inter-county level, you don't win an All-Ireland final on a performance in the semi-final. And I think
how do you shut it out, though? How do you shut it out of your life in the week before a game?
Look, I think it just comes down to experience is a big thing, a big part of it. You know when to venture out, when to keep your head down. Like I was always kind of the person where I actually got fierce energy off meeting people, getting the best wishes and seeing the flags around the town and that kind of stuff. It kind of highlighted and heightened the sense of the occasion for me. But at the same time, you don't go out and get lost in all that and get caught up in this, and all of a sudden we're wasting negative energy thinking about this, and then probably believing some of the hype that's going on about it. So it's experience. I think every player is different. It's how they'll approach it. Some fellas will put the head down and hide and won't go out into the world at all. I know some fellas will probably even avoid work, and I don't think that's a good idea either, because you're not sticking to your routine. And for me, as I said before, it was always a routine. I would always keep working up until probably the Thursday. Might take the Friday off. I'd still do my kicking on a Friday evening for an hour and a bit. I just dabbling out of town. If you're into the shop, you'll see, you get a bite of the atmosphere. So that was kind of it, So I think that's what players will do. They'll use their own initiative. They'll do what they're comfortable with. But look, as I say, they're lucky enough. There's only a 2-week turnaround, so it's not as if they're 4 weeks waiting. I think that's probably the good plus side to it. 4 weeks could be a long time to listen to a lot of stuff, what's been spoken about in the papers, people slapping the back, listen to club players. So the 2 weeks turnaround, I think, will be actually good to carry in this instance.
Éamonn, how do you kill hype?
How do you kill hype? There's going to be hype there. It's an All-Ireland final. It's the biggest game of the year. It's one of, with the All-Ireland hurling final, it's our national day. So there's going to be, there's going to be hype around it, and there's going to be excitement. Bryan covered it very well there. Different players had different routines. I'd have been very different. I was a complete introvert. I would have avoided everything. I would have had a serious tunnel vision, and I don't know if that was the right way looking back now. And I found I was actually worse from the management perspective when I went into that. I was a complete and utter introvert. It was just basically work, Kerry, and that was it. Family. There was nothing else. I'd hardly go out for a litre of milk. So I'm not sure if that was the right way, but as Bryan said, the two things are experience, number one, and the second thing then is the 2-week turnaround is hugely significant. I think that it just, before you know it, it's here. There's no time. It's almost a bit rushed, but from the point of view of the players and the management and just performing in the final, which is the most important thing, to perform, not to be distracted by anything else, it makes it a small bit easier. But I think you have to not embrace the hype, but you have to accept that it's a huge day and it's a privilege to be a part of it, and accept that part of it and enjoy that part of it, but then have the kind of cold focus that you have a job to do as a player and as a team.
What way were you, Oisín?
I think I sort of, I wouldn't have as much experience of All-Ireland final day as the lads, but I sort of tried it both ways. I think the first year that we were involved was new to us, just sort of embraced it, still quite young. Nothing really was phasing me personally, and probably a lot of the lads who played in that team. It seemed all quite fresh, and as I say, we embraced it as much as we could, and as far as training and that's concerned, we trained in County Louth for a lot of it. So the place that we trained in, there was nobody going to be, if people were going there, they were going there for a reason. They weren't going to be passing by or anything like that. So we didn't have a lot of people, as such, watching train or anything like that. So see, you don't want to hide away from it too much. I just felt in 2003 it just got the better of me, because I just became claustrophobic. I wouldn't go out in the door. I didn't want to see anybody. I was working in Armagh at the time, and I wouldn't leave for lunch. Like, if I found myself without something at lunchtime, I'd just stay in, because I didn't want to see anybody, didn't want to communicate it. I had the stock answer ready for everybody, but I didn't even want to deliver that anymore. So I would have said that I would have sampled both sides of it, and having had that experience, and used it obviously as on a lesser way, as far as the club finals are concerned, I would have tried to embrace it more than I would have tried to hide away from it, because I thought when I hid away from it, it wasn't conducive or at all helpful to the performance, because I just, as I say, it just became too claustrophobic.
Do you think there are parallels between this Galway team and your Armagh team 20 years on, in the way of, just coming into the final really nicely, improving as it goes along, and not expected necessarily to win, but determined to win?
I think the parallel that I would see is that they're a team that have gained belief, by what has gone on, like the Mayo game, and and the way that they I was going to use the word collapse. It wasn't a collapse, but the way that they didn't finish the game out again, the Roscommon game, you go into the Armagh game, and they're very much tested mentally, I think. And then the Derry game for me was a significant one, even though, the Derry challenge didn't really materialise. But I thought, to back up the performance against Armagh was huge, and have belief in exactly what they were doing, to come up against a defensive team like Derry and not blink, to go 3-0 down, to be 3-1 down with 29 minutes, gone in the game. And I think they learned a good bit about themselves. So yeah, there's a few similarities. I just think that I get the feeling that Galway are playing with a huge amount of confidence, probably more confidence that we would have went into an All-Ireland final with, and a real know-how about how they're going to go about things. And as I say, they've had the opportunity to blink a couple of times and they haven't blinked. They've just powered on and powered through. So they're significant moments as a footballer, as a team. The significant moments are, they're there and playing to be seen by, from a Galway point of view, all year. None more so than, going down to the wire against Armagh when they had the game won, and then, backing it up against Derry.
But Kevin, if they are to win, Galway have to hold Sean O'Shea, have to hold David Clifford. Who's picking them up?
I expect Clifford will be either Liam Silk or Sean Kelly. And I think Liam Silk will get that job, to be honest. But I tell you, it's going to be a zonal defence. It's going to be one, but zonal inside it, because they're not going to leave those guys. I expect not a 1v1. Probably John Daly will stay centre back on Sean O'Shea, I would think. Now, I think Sean O'Shea needs to look at John Daly as well, because his performance against Derry was top class. His passing, I think he completely made Comer. If you look at everything he done, the point before half time was John Daly pass. The turnover ball on the Derry midfielder was him.
Glass.
Yeah. The goal from Cormer was him, the little punt pass. So he's a really good passer of a ball, and he doesn't make too many mistakes. And again, before half time, he kicked a massive point himself. So that's going to be a big one, even for to reverse it around. John Daly had an influence, I do think that they'll stay with that, but I don't see them not coming out that shell for a while. I think they're going to make sure that they stay defensively solid. But I just come back to the last points there. I suppose this is the first time. I suppose Derry, Armagh, they're not your traditional team up there for the last 6-7 years. How battle hardened are they? I know Derry won Ulster, and Armagh have improved in the last year or two. So I think the mental test is going to be a bit stronger. Even look back on Derry, you have to wonder why a few weaknesses that did show up in the Armagh game, how Derry didn't even test that. I presume Kerry are going to be looking at a few of those weaknesses. And, with a few high balls in the square, I didn't see one against Derry. So I'm just not so sure how battle-hardened those two teams are to actually judge. So that's a massive one, I suppose, coming forward next week, because Kerry will push up. And that's why I think that David Moore will go on Conway. I expect them to push up and force the kickouts long. The first few minutes when Derry pushed up, it was all long. So I think those matchups are going to be crucial, and the midfield battle is going to be crucial in this one, as far as I'm concerned, because they will be hitting them. I don't know if you noticed last night, lads, the Galway press. It was 5 in the front full forward line. You had almost 4 behind that and 2 behind that. You had a complete push up on, and I thought Derry dealt with that very poorly. I'd expect that Kerry will overload one side to take out that zone. But again, that's something we'll have enough done in 2 weeks. It's hard to know. But to answer your questions, Bodo, I don't think there'll be a massive amount of matchups. I think it's going to be 1 or 2, and it's going to be zonal after that. Leamstick, I expect to go on Clifford with a double team all the time. I don't expect Comer to be marked the way he was marked against Derry. The defender on Comer completely. Rogers completely was just focused on Comer's eyes. He didn't see when the ball was coming. He didn't see when it wasn't coming. I'd expect the Kerry will be a lot cuter than that. So if that's the case, and Kerry is a sweeper as well, Comer might find it hard to get as much space he got inside the Derry defence as well. So it'll be interesting, but I do think Liam Selke will probably take up Clifford.
Éamonn, what do you see on that? What do you see those? What matchups do you think Galway will go at first of all?
Look, I wouldn't be disagreeing with Kevin, because I think he'd have a much better sense of all of those Galway lads. I just think Sean Kelly, he's Galway's captain, he's their leader. I know he probably wouldn't even be in the full back line but for the injury to Sean Mulcairn, but I have a feeling he could pick up David. He marked him in the Sigerson final. I know it was a completely different game, different conditions and everything, but he has that experience of marking him already. So it wouldn't shock me to see Sean Kelly on David, and possibly for Sean Kelly to drive on a bit when Galway are in possession as well and try and suck David out the field a bit, chasing him. Because early on in an All-Ireland, when it's going to be frantic and cagey and nervy and everything else, not that it's going to be every man for himself, but in that initial settling in period, there can be that element of every man for himself, and no forward would want to let his man go and create overlaps. So I wouldn't be shocked to see Sean Kelly and David, or as Kevin said, Liam Silk, because he was outstanding on McGuigan the last day out. Other than that, the John Daly one I think is an interesting one, because he has been brilliant sweeping, and if he's in a man marking role, and Shawnee, do Galway lose some of his effect by giving him that kind of a job, particularly if Shawnee plays closer to goal like he did against Dublin, and that he's playing closer to the full forward line than the half forward line. Is that something that would suit John Daly, or would they look at something different there?
Kieran Malloy, maybe.
Kieran Malloy possibly, but again, he's very good going the other way. But I think the Kerry matchups are very clear. The Galway ones, I'm not as convinced yet. But like I said, obviously Kevin's insight there would be would be much.
And what are your
superior.
Kerry matchups then? What are you doing? What are you doing if you are Jack?
I think Shane Welch will be picked up by Tom Sullivan from the point of view that he can match him athletically, and also Tom will try to go the other way off him. That if Shane Welch is staying out the field a bit, that'll actually suit Tom, and he'll drive on up the field. I think Damien Comer will be marked by Jason Foley, Rob Finnerty by Graham O'Sullivan. The half-back line, I think, could be interesting. I think Patrick Kelly will be picked up by Gavin White if he's playing, or Paul Murphy. Matthew Tierney, I think, could be picked up by Bryan O'Biogliach, and Johnny Heaney. Then I think Tig Morley might match up with Johnny Heaney, because I expect Johnny Heaney to play quite deep, possibly as a permanent extra defender, and coming on from there. And Tig will match up with him and free himself up to play right deep in front of Comer and Jason Foley. So that's the way that I'd be expecting. If Johnny Heaney plays in a more offensive role, Tig could pick up Matthew Tierney in that kind of a situation and try and drop off him and maybe get a bit of a help from the likes of Diarmuid O'Connor in the half-forward line. But I do expect Johnny Heaney and Patrick Kelly to play quite deep to help out their half-back line, to allow them, the likes of Dylan McHugh and Kieran Malloy, drop in and, crowd out that D and make it as hard as possible for Kerry. So I don't know what Bryan thinks, but to me, that they're the kind of matchups that suit the Kerry lads. Obviously, the Jason and Damien Comer, that's a big test for Jason physically, more so than anything else. Jason is playing very well, and I think he's playing well individually, but also as part of the defensive system that Kerry have in place this year. So he'll need a bit of help there. And I think the plan B then would be that if Comer was getting the upper hand on Jason physically, that Tig could slot in and go one-on-one with Comer, because he's the only Kerry back really that could match him physically for his strength. So yeah, that's the way I'd be thinking, but I'd be interested to see what Bryan thinks, because he'd obviously know all the lads very well as well.
No, I find it hard to argue that, Éamonn. I think Tom and Shane Walsh, I think, is probably the obvious one. I think you have to try and get Shane Walsh away from goal. He does kind of play out wide, so I think that's the big one. My only concern would probably just be that physicality with Shane Walsh. He's very physical, strong, running at you. I just kind of worry about Tom with a physical player going at him. But in saying that, I think the Kerry system, the way they set up the back, I think it allows for a bit of protection with bodies back there to help you out, and especially the way Tig double teams and kind of comes in behind to help you out. That if someone does beat you, Tig is there to help to protect you. I agree with you as well, Éamonn. I think Bryan will pick up Matthew Tierney, for the simple reason being is it just allows Tig to drop off. I think if Tig drops off Matthew Tierney, I think Matthew Tierney is the kind of player that could seriously hurt you. He's a good baller, can kick, can score, can create. And that's the biggest fear I would have, that if Kerry set off him, he would seriously hurt you. And I think if you look at the Dublin game as well, they put Bryan O'Biogliach after Kilkenny, because I think it's the same fear that if Tig went to double team, you couldn't afford to leave Kieran Kilkenny to roam Croke Park because he'd hurt you too much. So I think other than that, that's what will happen. And I think the big thing is for the protection of Jason Foley. I think you need Tig playing that +1, because he's been very good at it. And I suppose the last thing is it's the pressure of the ball coming in. I don't care even how good Jason Foley is or how much of a +1 you have back there. If you're giving, if Comer's able to get handy ball and he's able to turn and go at you, you can't stop him. So I think the big thing for me is that there's serious pressure on the ball coming in. That he's not getting ball handy, he's not getting a handy pop pass on top of the where he's on the loop, or he's coming and he's turning, running at Jason. That if he's getting the ball, he's running away from goal, and he's probably running into Tig Morley or running into Bryan O'Biogliach or running into Paddy Clifford or Diarmuid O'Connor. That he's running into traffic. So I think that's the big one for me. That's the pressure on the ball going in. It has to be immense as well, because you can't just be allowing little pop passes to the likes of them, even to Rob Finnerty. Do you know what I mean? He's been kicking some fantastic scores as well this year. And I suppose that's one of the big things where I think Galway have a massive, well, not advantage, but a massive feather in their cap from other teams. They have 6 fantastic forwards they're all capable of scoring. You know, whereas other teams you might only have 1 or 2 or 3 players that are capable of kicking scores. Matthew Tierney can score, Rob Finnerty can score, and they can all score from 35, 40 yards. So I think that's going to be something that Kerry are going to come up against a forward unit that all 6 forwards are capable of really hurting you. So I wouldn't argue with Éamonn's matchups there. I think that's pretty accurate how I think it would go as well.
Oisín, what do you think of those matchups?
Yeah, no, I'd say that those Kerry matchups are the ones we're going to see. I suppose the only one that is tricky for Kerry is the Foley on Como, on the way Comer's playing. Like, I haven't never seen him play as well. Like, the fact that he's been fit, he's games under his belt, he's just looked completely unmarkable the last day. I think Kerry will be forced into, double teaming him at times, and that might leave a wee bit of extra space. Taig Morley probably hasn't done a lot of that so far. I think, the perfect preparation for that would have been Conor O'Callaghan playing the last day, and how Kerry would have coped with that. So they'll have to cope with Comer, because I think he's I can't tell you how good he's playing at the minute. He just looks so sharp. At the other end of the field, I actually think Kelly will pick up Clifford, and I actually think Silk will actually pick up Sean O'Shea. I think they are 2 decent matchups, but again, similar to Comer at the other end of the field, those 2 boys in any sort of space whatsoever is going to hurt you, and that's as simple as that. And it's going to take Malloy and Heaney and whoever else finds themselves in there
as well.
Yeah, and even Kelly McDade coming back in there, he has the ability to cover a lot of that ground very quickly. So they're probably the matchups that I would see, and again, the one that sort of sticks out is probably how Morley tinkers with playing +1 and also double teaming Damien Como.
My fear with the Morley and the sweeper is I'm not so sure they're fully there with it.
Yeah.
Bryan mentioned about the pressure up front to stop the kicker. Like, you obviously delay, you deny, you defend, but that deny part for me on where the sweeper is sitting for Kerry at the minute is slightly in no man's land. It takes a time to get back, so that, as I said before, if you're more than 1 kick away, you should be covering the space. If you're less than a kick away, you should be right inside Comer. But I just find that sweeper is sitting a bit slowly in the centre of nowhere for a little while. I know it's covering the line, but allowing the V cuts behind the head and the stuff like that. So it's something I presume they'll have worked on over the last 2 or 3 weeks, because that's going to be vital to closing off the big danger area inside for Comer. And at the minute, Comer, any bouncing ball for him is just sticking to his hands full time. It's not falling for a split second, and it's given time to turn like Conor O'Callaghan does. So that's a huge one for Kerry to get that sweeper. I think a few yards here and there makes a huge difference about denying the ball coming in, and defending should be the last of the 3. So if you don't pressure on the kicker and the sweeper is in the right place, you're going to be under pressure with the form Comer's in at the minute.
It was interesting, Kevin. I went back and I looked at Dublin Kerry the other night, and it struck me that where Kerry have their defensive D was actually quite deep, and Dublin were offered but spurned a whole load of kicks from 40 to 45 metres out in good slots. Sean Bugler spurned a couple, Kilkenny spurned a couple, Brian Howard took one and spurned others, Brian Fenton spurned them. I think if Galway go for these, and if they get the right people doing the shooting, namely if they get Paul Conroy on that loop further out, I think there's profit there for them.
Yeah, there's definitely gaps, and I think even Fenton. I think Fenton missed 2 in the first half the last day, which was unlike him. And if the pockets aren't filled up, you could be 100% right. Maybe they're looking too much at the sweeper and falling too much back. But those gaps, I suppose Croke Park will always give you the extra gaps between the players in your defensive system, because whether it's a bigger pitch or not, it plays a bigger pitch, and those half-yard opportunities will turn themselves. But again, if Conway is targeted for those shots, I presume Conway will be targeted for those pockets because he has been hitting the target quite well. But at the same time, I suppose it was like going back to Bryan, is the pressure on that ball is going to be crucial. And you cannot afford to sit off those guys. Tierney will shoot from distance. He's turned down a few this year's championship. I think he's better than what he's showing. McDade will shoot, as we saw as well. He can shoot. Conway can shoot. Malloy will have a pot. Heaney will have a pot. So they're going to have to push out without doubt. And again, that's what the +1 means is so crucial. If the unit passes out, does the +1 go an extra few yards with them? And if they do, that's more of a gap left for the pop pass over the top. So that's going to be, to get that balance is right as well. But I do expect opportunities will come like that. But Kerry were aggressive. I think Kerry were more aggressive than what Derry would have been, and also Armagh.
Yeah. So this is the key, and I want to ask you about this, Brian. We've talked about matchups. We've talked about team selection. We've talked about general mood. But really, is this game not really about mindset? If you look at Dublin Kerry the last day, I thought what Kerry did brilliantly was it wasn't just they said we're not going to be bullied by Dublin. If they get us, we're going to push back at them. They actually said we are going to physically suppress Dublin from the start. So from the very first throw in, even before the ball was thrown in, Kerry lads, notably Sean O'Shea and John Small, were taking it to them physically. I think that's going to happen again on Sunday. And this mindset, how do you get yourself in the mindset that's exactly right, exactly the right pitch?
Well, I'd say, to be honest, the mindset was right the last day, And for me, while Kerry just hung on in the end, for me, that was a lot more in that game. If Kerry they missed the penalty, Stephen O'Brien picked the ball off the ground in the square, and there's a certain goal on. The goal that Dublin got was a 1 in a million, really. It was an unbelievable finish after David had dropped the ball. And again, maybe back to Oisín's point, that's maybe where David Morgan come into it. Maybe that's why they took him off. The ball went through his hands. Was it tiredness? He's the best pair of hands in Ireland, so why would he go through it? But I suppose that intensity that brought with Kerry was massive. So David Morgan and all those lads are part of that. So they may have to be looking at subs if that's the case, because there's only so much left in the legs if you're going to go pushing like that from Go Park. But again, that's is that something that Galway have experienced? I don't think so. Derry fell off. Completely fell off, like Galway fell off. That was a game of chess for 30 minutes. So in that game, a lot of the players got a rest period. It was all about passing the ball around, trying to find the hole. So
you seem a little bit skeptical of Galway's chances.
No, I'm not. What I'm saying is this is going to be this is Division 1 winners as against Division 2 in the league, right? They've come out, they've beaten Derry, but I don't think that Derry or Armagh bring that massive physicality that Kerry will do.
I think your team in '98 won the championship from Division 3. Didn't you win the All Ireland from Division 3?
I think it was Division 2A or something. It was a bit mixed up. I know we played Kilkenny in March. That's all I know.
Yeah, sorry.
We played Kilkenny in March.
Win an All Ireland.
That's all I know. But but I look at it. It's not that. But I mean, if you're looking at it, Galway beaten Kerry in 2018. Then that's on the bet. They've also beaten them in the under 20. When Jack O'Connor was over them, where Kerry were supposed to have a massive team. Galway got 3 minor finals. They've won an under 20 themselves in the meantime. So I think that's a motivation for Kerry not to get a resting on the laurels, because I presume there's a bit of a, how would I say it, a bit of a memory there from 2018 as well. So that will help Kerry to I suppose, motivate themselves. But I'm not skeptical of their chances. But what I'm looking at is where could the pitfalls be? I'm looking at Kerry because I believe there's pitfalls in Kerry as well. But I'm just...
Where are they?
Sorry?
Where are they?
Well, I've mentioned the sweeper. I've also mentioned the mentality of hanging on. In 2020, they lost to Cork. They lost to Tyrone last year when they're supposed to have beaten Tyrone. So there's a lot of, I suppose, scars there that where a fear factor can come in. And that slightly crept in against Dublin in the last 15 minutes. Something either tiredness crept in or a small bit of fear factor crept in. But they were hanging on in the end, and a massive kick by Sean O'Shea got them off the line. I don't think it should have brought that. Now, if Galway can bring it to that point, there's going to be questions coming in the Kerry's head as well, because they're massive favourites in this. Because how we look at it, there's a massive expectation in Kerry. So Galway can play with a free will. And so there's a few pitfalls in each side, but they're both very different in both dressing rooms.
Do you think that this Kerry team is as good as the Kerry teams that Éamonn had?
I'm not so sure it is. And by that, I'm looking at this is, Éamonn, your Crowley centre half back. I think he done his cruciate back in, was it 2019 or he was 2018, wasn't he? You have Gainey, his form isn't as strong as it was. He's a few years older. You have Stephen Bryan, who's not as strong as it was. In my opinion, his pace doesn't seem to be doing as much damage. You have David Morton, who's a lot older. All those guys are still playing. Paddy Clifford is a plus, without a doubt. He's come in. But I think there might be a few more minuses than there is pluses. So, I suppose all the teams are waiting for Dublin to fall back in the pack, and there's no doubt they've fallen back in the last 2 years now. So it's opportunity knocks. But I think Éamonn may have had a stronger team, a little bit stronger than it is now. I'm not so sure, but that's my feeling on it.
Éamonn, do you think this team is better than your team?
Oh, Jesus, that's an awful question, lad.
Off the fence now, Éamonn.
No, I have to. You I don't know how to respond to that. Look, when I was involved with the lads, I felt every year that we were involved, we had the best players in Kerry in the squad, competing with each other for starting jerseys. We had a very tight group. We were very united, and we gave it everything every year. 2018, Kevin mentioned it there, and he said that there might be some fellas still thinking about it. Well, I'm still thinking about it anyway, Kevin, but obviously that has no bearing on Sunday. So, that game, Kevin got Galway 100% right that day. We underperformed that day. We didn't play well. So it was disappointing, and it was the only time during my time involved that in a big championship game that we didn't show up. We didn't always win. We didn't always play well, but for whatever reason, we didn't show up that day. And I think if you're involved in a team, we've all been there, whether it's with club or colleges or whatever, or at the top level. It's very disappointing when you don't give a representation of yourself on the big day. And it scuppered us in 2018, no doubt about it. But in terms of which is the better squad, I'm not sure. Look,
you were in there, Bryan. You call it. I believe you get the cast and vote here.
It's hard to look. It's hard to answer questions like that, Paul, because you go back and you say, what about the teams back in the mid-noughties that were contesting all our Ireland finals, or are they better than this team? And football has changed. Everything is different. Players got older. You add into the mix David Clifford, who wasn't involved when Éamonn was there in 2016. You have James O'Donoghue, who was in the corner then at that time. Two different players, with two fantastic.
It's a fairly straightforward question now. Hold on. Would your team beat this team? It's a straightforward matchup. Who wins?
But it's not a straightforward question. It's you can't just say that. It's not just straightforward enough. They're two different teams. Okay, there's a bit of overlap with personnel, but it's impossible to answer, Paul. I suppose if I look back now from the point of view, and this is probably just being biased because I was there, we had some great characters in that 16 team. Big fellas like Mark O'Shea, Aidan O'Mahony, Kieran Donaghy, Declan O'Sullivan. And look, I think if you look back, they were just big names, been there, done that, and going back to 2014. If I go back to there was 14, even go back to 16, I know Mark had moved on, Declan had moved on, Kieran was still there. They were big young players who had done it. So I'd probably be biased because I was there at that stage.
Yeah.
I
suppose the way I'm coming at this, I'm not going to push you to answer that because it's not fair. But the reason why I'm coming about this is is the standard of football lower in this year's championship and even last year than it was, we'll say, in the Dublin 5 in a row, 6 in a row years?
I wouldn't say it's. See, football is. I think this is a conversation for another podcast, another episode, Paul, because where football is going at the moment, I kind of not worry, but it's completely different. Even where I think Éamonn, when you took over in 13, it's completely changed since then. Do you know what I mean? And I think we were one of the first years I really noticed it was when Keane O'Neill came in and we brought in MetroFit and things like that, and the GPS units came in. I think prior to that, we only had a visit from a dietitian every couple of months. This whole thing just kicked off all of a sudden, and it got very professional. I think even nowadays, it's gone. It's professional. If I'm being perfectly honest with it, from the point of view of if you look at the work that each individual or each county teams are doing versus professional outfits, be it rugby or soccer, the same amount of time is going into it. The same amount of effort is probably more, except you have players who are getting up at 7 o'clock in the morning going to work, and the recovery just isn't there. But for me, the game has changed. I think it's changed because of the football has changed from the point of view that possession is 9/10 of the law. You don't cough up, you don't give the ball away because teams now will punish you. Teams are way fitter than what they were going back 5, 6, 10 years ago. And I just think football has completely and utterly changed. I'm one of the old traditions, kick passing kind of a person. That's what I like to see. I totally detest what I saw Derry bringing to the championship this year. But again, for me, where football is kind of going at the moment is we're training athletes to be footballers rather than training footballers to play football. But look, that's another episode for me.
It is another episode, and we will come back and we will talk about that. Oisín, how do you look at the standard of football this year?
I think if you're talking about the Dublin 6 in a row team, I think it's probably a bit back from that. I think they set an unbelievable standard, and I think Mayo pushing them all the way. Then you had Kerry and Tyrone coming along behind them. So I think there was probably more teams really, really pushing. Yet I sort of, like, personally speaking, I've actually enjoyed this year. I think there's been some great stuff, but I think as far as quality goes, I think we're probably a wee bit back on where we were. And if you want me to answer that question about the two boys failed to answer,
I would like you to answer that.
By them not answering the question would tell me that they think they were a lot better back then than this crew. But I suppose like even it just remarkable. Paul and I talked to you about it last year. It was remarkable when I was down in Killarney for the league match with Tyrone, and they were after blowing Tyrone out of the water, and I was so excited by the performance and everything, but I was on my own. Nobody in Kerry was that excited about it, and turns out they ended up being right. So the unfortunate tag with this team here is until they win in All Ireland. I mean, you're just not viewed in those ways, and in a place like Kerry.
You've been very skeptical of Kerry, even earlier this year. I know you said after the semi-final that they've met all the challenges that they've gone on, but it seems to me you're still not convinced.
I just think there's still loads of question marks around them, and again, that probably comes back to the quality of the championship. But everything would tell you when you look at them that they're definitely not the finished article. But I have to say that the way they've approached the championship, the way they've changed things, and played a game which doesn't seem to be the most natural thing in the world, to them, certainly for me, they deserve a lot of credit. And look, they have passed all the tests along the way, but I suppose this is the most significant one. And if I really want to, sit down and think about, the question marks that's over them, like, those question marks probably haven't been fully answered, and that's because of the quarterfinal performance against Mayo and the last day against Dublin. So that might be nitpicking on my behalf, because they ended up winning the game against Mayo quite easily. The game against Dublin is a game that notoriously they've lost in the last number of years. So they're definitely answering questions as they go along, but it's amazing. Like, unless they win the All Ireland, those question marks remain. And probably you'd look at it in a completely different light if they don't win it. You look back and you say, did they really, answer those questions that we thought they answered along the way? So it's like that sport. It's just a weird one. Like, there's no more that they can do at the minute than what they've done, but they have to finish the job now.
What's the mood in Galway like, Kevin?
Very upbeat. I was at a function last night, just to a fundraising function in Loughrea there, and very, very upbeat. They've given themselves a great chance. They're not putting pressure on the players whatsoever. Feel it's a good year so far, which is a big thing for them. But they also feel they have a chance. And like we're talking here today, like even what Sheehan said, like is until the Kerry team gets over the line, they're not over the line, and they have shown some frailties. There's no doubt about that. But at the same time, they're getting the job done. And I suppose, to answer your question on the last question, it'll be important that Galway are right there with Kerry all the way, because that'll give us a better line as to what the form of all the other teams are like now. Because we've new teams coming through. You've Derry, you've Armagh, you've Tyrone, which looks like they've gone backwards. Donegal looks like they've gone a little bit backwards. But this game might give us a better feel to where we're at. I don't think, will we up to be Dublin standard 6 in a row? Probably not yet. But the winners of this match could go on to try maybe start challenging that. But the mood is very good, Paul, to be honest.
Does the fact that Galway have such a tradition? Does the fact that Galway have such a tradition of success and such a tradition of football matter? Like, it's not like the standard in Galway is to win a final. That's the ambition.
Well, I'd say the strike rate isn't too bad from Galway in finals, but traditionally, I suppose we're in third place, but we're so far behind. We're in 9, so like I don't need to be saying it, but I mean we won 3 in a row. We had a 32-year gap. We won 2 out of 4, and we've had another huge gap again. So we've a lot of gaps in there. So is the tradition as strong as we keep saying it is? Not until we're more consistent, I would think. So, but to be fair, I think the mood is good. There's no pressure whatsoever being put on players, and it's kind of, well, you've got this far, so far, do your best type of thing. And I think there's different in Kerry because there's a massive expectation in Kerry now because you've beaten Dublin. There's a drought of whatever 8 years. That's a drought in Kerry. There wouldn't be a drought in Galway. And there's massive pressure on Kerry compared to Galway.
Can I ask you about Padraic Joyce? So when Padraic Joyce was a player in your dressing room, did you see him as a future manager?
That's a good question. I probably was in the dressing room with him 4 or 5 or 6 years. Unfortunately for me, I was in the twilight of my career and I was the only married person with a child. So in relation to, I suppose, mixing with the younger fellas, you're probably asking the wrong fella because I wouldn't have been out that much like you guys were. But I suppose I had my years done before that. But look, I suppose Padraic would have massive confidence in himself. Business-wise as well, he's done very well for himself. So he's obviously managing a lot of people. So that was always something that I would say he would feel he would go on to do. It's a very hard question for me to answer that because I wouldn't even know myself, Paul, to be honest. I got a call about 2008 and I wouldn't even know whether it was going to manage myself and I just took a chance on it, if you know what I mean? So I don't know. Yeah. It wouldn't have been sticking out there to say, yes, he has to manage Galway. I wouldn't have seen that. But obviously, that was always in his mind and he's found himself there now at the minute in a final. Great place to be for him.
Do you think he's the best footballer you played with?
That's like the question about the 2018 and this team. It's the one I can't answer. I mean, look, it's honestly, if you want to put the full package, it's a question I just can't answer because look at it, with Michael Donlan, with Jeff Fallon, they're all forwards, totally different type players, totally different skill sets. Then I had Gary Fahey at the back and with Thomas Mannion. Skillful wise, yes. Full package, it's very hard to just take it out of the other guys. I'd be doing it fierce injustice to all the other great players. I have to take the full package in there, and I don't think Éamonn ever had the full package, but he's up there, obviously.
Did you play on him, Éamonn?
I did. Played against him a good bit. We're the same age, so we'd have come across each other minor, under 21, senior. So played a lot on him. Marked him not that often, now and again. Usually he was inside in the full forward line out of the way, but as Kevin said there, it wasn't like you got some handy when it was either Michael Donlan or Jeff Allen then, so you were always going to have your hands full. But he was a great player in fairness, and had longevity as well and kept at it even when, right up to the end, even when for a fellow who had such success early in his career, he enjoyed it so much that he kept going even when things weren't going as well for Galway. But yeah, he was a fantastic player.
Yeah, I remember seeing him being marked by Tyrone's Conor Gormley in a Ireland, it might have been quarter final very late on in his career, and Gormley was absolutely giving him pucks of it on the field, but Joyce just stayed at it. And I remember thinking there was nothing really in it for him. You couldn't see how Galway would win in All Ireland, but he stayed at it. He stayed at it to the end in the whole way. Oisín, I was thinking about this. If the Footballer of the Year was awarded before the All Ireland final, who would you give it to?
Tough the way you frame that question. Can I give you a couple? No.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Sean O'Shea, David Clifford.
Plenty of room on the fence today, as you can see.
I thought we were running out of room on the fence.
Build another one.
David Clifford, Sean O'Shea, Damien Comer. Probably at this stage between Clifford and Comer so far.
Bryan.
I'd be very biased now and just for the kick alone against Dublin, Sean O'Shea. I think Sean Kelly's been very good for Galway this season. I think he hasn't put a foot wrong. If I look back to even Chris McCaig with Derry, every person he's came up against, he just put him in his pocket. He hasn't found wanting at all. But again, look, I think in reality, the Player of the Year is going to come down to the All Ireland final, and more often than not, it's on the winning team. Probably Damien Comer, depends on David Clifford. I think big shout for Tom Sullivan as well. He's had a great year, but I'd probably down between David Clifford and Damien Comer.
Yeah, what do you think, Kevin?
Yeah, I'd be with the lads on that one. I think at the minute, I suppose, yeah, Clifford and Comer. To be honest with you, I know Sean O'Shea has been good. Thought would have probably fell out of the game, the last game, for long periods, other than the start and the big kick at the finish. But again, one big game from him would bring them right up there again. I know we spoke about it. You asked this question, Paul, about his entitlement on the Kerry team. I thought Paddy Clifford has done a lot of stuff for Kerry as well. I know he's been picked up by all the big names all year. So he's tied up other big players as well while he was being quiet in one or two games. But I thought he was superb in the last game. So I'd have him up there as well. Like you said, Sean Kelly is there. Keely McDade has had a late good few games for Galway as well. But I think pole position is Damien Comer and David Clifford. Shane Walsh obviously was talked about that during the year, but I suppose he's going to have a big one in the final. It was fairly quiet in the last two games, apart from the freeze. So the two boys I'd probably in pole position.
I think if Paddy Clifford gets Footballer of the Year, it will actually just underline my incapacity to make judgments about either players or matches. And get every prediction that I touch entirely wrong. I suppose it's the beauty of football, that you can be so wrong so repeatedly and get people to tell you as often as they possibly can. Éamonn, who would you go with?
I wouldn't disagree with the lads. I think fair play to Bryan, because I was saying I'd be probably the only one backing for a few backs that there have been some great back displays. I think Tom Sullivan has been outstanding for Kerry this year. I think Tadhg Morley has had a huge effect, on the way Kerry. I don't think he's going to get Player of the Year because of the role he's playing, but the role that he has played has been hugely significant for Kerry. And Sean Kelly and John Daly on the Galway side have been brilliant as well. Chrissy McCaig, Bryan mentioned him. Generally, it's the forwards, so you are looking at like Damien Comer, the two Cliffords, and Sean O'Shea, and like it comes down to the final. Who wins the final and who performs to the top level in the final is generally the person who's going to get it. So I still think it's very open. The Player of the Year race, which is no bad thing.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that if your team wins and you score 1-4 in the final, if you're David Clifford or Sean O'Shea or Comer, you're probably nailed on. To get a Tony Lean, who isn't with us today, he has Thomas Sullivan for Player of the Year. Young Player of the Year. Now, we're going to take a relaxed view of what qualifies you for Young Player of the Year. We're not saying it's 21 or younger. Oisín, what are you going for?
Just when the lads are talking about defenders, I was really, really impressed with McCluskey, Conor McCluskey from Derry this year.
Derry, yeah.
Back. Yeah, I thought he was exceptional and probably didn't get much of a look in because of Rodgers and McKaig's performance. But for a young player, new onto the scene, newish, playing at that level, and getting the run that they got a few tough jobs along the way, and for me, probably he would be somebody that I would like to see in the mix for that.
Okay, Bryan.
Again, probably being a bit grey with the age of the young player of the year, but I suppose Killian McDade is in there to shout. I believe he's 22, 23. Is he that age?
I'd say about 24, Bryan, as far as I know.
I would say maybe he's like the older.
I think
It's a big minor. I suppose one person that I thought he started a great campaign was Lee Gannon of Dublin, cornerback.
Yeah,
I think he has had a fantastic campaign with Dublin. He kicked 2 or 3 points in a couple of games. Kicked the first point in the game last weekend, or 2 weeks ago against Kerry. He was marking David Clifford for periods, but I think in the end, I don't think he was kind of been. There was so much swapping and changing in Dublin back then. He was picking up different players, but outside of that, I thought he had a very solid campaign for his first outing with Dublin. So probably one or two of them, I think.
What do you think, Kevin?
Yeah, McCluskey. I thought McCluskey was brilliant, and I've seen him. I thought just his skill as a defender is been brilliant. He's right up there for me. Bob Finnerty, if you think I think he's about 23, whether he's in the right age group or not, but quite the last game, but that was totally down to the defensive setup. But he's been really good. He got massive points for Galway all year. I think he's been really good. What age is Reen, Oisín?
23.
So again, obviously he has to be in there somewhere if that allows, I think, the age group. So those 3 guys, and Gannon, obviously, Bryan has been very good as well. So around there, I'd be thinking I'd be stopping.
Yeah, I think Gannon was pretty good, but I think he ran into the air got very thin towards the end of that semi-final. I think he ran into a bit of bother after about 20 minutes, turning over ball and high solos and fouling. But Éamonn, who do you think?
Similar to the lads, Paul. I think that if Rian O'Neill is eligible, I think that he has to be a front runner. I think the Galway lads, if they're young, I think they're young enough. Matthew Tierney and Patrick Kelly. I'm kind of ruling out the likes of Rob Finnerty, Killian McDade, those lads that they're a bit older. Matthew Tierney, Patrick Kelly, I think both have had very good years. And the 2 backs in, Conor McCluskey and Lee Gannon as well. I had those as well. Was very impressed with Conor McCluskey, and I mentioned that actually the day of that game that he actually marked David Clifford in the 2017 All-Ireland final.
Yep.
That David Clifford scored 4-4 for Derry. So he's come a long way, and that he managed to tie up Shane Welsh as well as he did the last days, and with excellent defending, near hand tackling, tracking him, matching his pace, no fouling. It was real top class stuff. So again, I think the Galway lads, the likes of Patrick Kelly or Matthew Tierney, if they had a big final, they'd have a great shout for getting Player of the Year.
Yeah, I was thinking about Matthew Tierney. Actually, Patrick Kelly intrigues me, Kevin, and just from a coaching point of view, I played with a fella in Tullamore on club football. He was very tall and he used to catch kickouts, but if he actually successfully executed a solo, he'd nearly be waving to the crowd, or he'd look like he was going to try and injure himself when he tried to kick the ball. But
what was his name again, Paul?
Yeah, I better not give it. So tall players aren't ordinarily associated with this level of skill that Patrick Kelly has, because he's an incredibly skillful footballer.
Yeah, and Paul, he's a fella I don't know much about above all the fellas because his background has been playing a lot of soccer, and I think he's been playing in international soccer as well and playing at loan. So it's kind of in the last 2 years or so he's kind of fallen on the football side. So he hasn't been seen a whole pile up. But yeah, look, he's a tall guy. He's a great run. I suppose what he just needs to do, maybe he got marked the last day, probably put it wide. I think he fisted a close in shot off the post, and he just needs that little bit of experience and the confidence to bring him on a bit. But look, he's shown all the skills. He's a huge fella, and I just in the system as well. He seems to be adapting to it. The minute the ball is gone, he just seems to know he's running back to a certain area to allow the wing backs fall in behind the back. So he seems to be a smart enough guy. But he's one of the guys I just don't actually. I haven't even met him.
I think he's the key to Sunday in some respects for Galway, for getting out on the kick out and for going at that left side of the Kerry defence. If Thomas Sullivan's gone with Shane Walsh and that space is open in front of Finnerty, I think it's going to get really interesting what happens down that side with Patrick Kelly. How do you view him, Bryan?
Yeah, I think he's been very good. I'm kind of going to question now with tall fellas soloing balls and what height is Patrick Kelly?
What height were you, Bryan?
I don't know. I'm debating over whether to answer that question. Paul, are you classifying as tall? There's a couple of fellas there now. I think there's Kieran Dunn. He's quite tall, and David Moore and Anthony Maher, they're all able to solo balls. Paul Conroy. So
I get back in my box now.
I was kind of wondering there what you're classifying as tall footballers, but no, I think he's been excellent. I think he's been a great find for them. As Kevin mentioned there, he seems to know his role down to a T, and he's actually excellent at his role. I think he could be one of those dangers that Kerry have for Kerry the weekend. I do agree with you. And if Gavin White is out, I do think he could cause a lot of trouble coming on his side. And if Galway go after the kick-outs with him, because he is a big target man out there. The other side to that, then again, is just depending on what Kerry will do to maybe pin him back or to see if they can hurt him if he's sitting back. Look, at the end of the day, he's not a defender. He's a half forward. So it'll be interesting to see how Kerry will line up now. But look, I think he's a fine footballer. He's been a massive find for Galway this season. And what I like about him, as much as we were talking about him being defensive, he still pops up with scores, still pop you up getting a goal, still pop you up kicking his 1 or 2 points. So he's not just in there being, I suppose, as some people call a workhorse or just going back there and playing an extra body in the backs. He's also contributing to the attack as well, which is massive. So definitely a plus for the Galway.
Yeah, I was thinking as well, just before we talk about predictions, I think this could be an incredibly defensive final. And I remember thinking at about 20 minutes into the Dublin Kerry first half, I looked down to the left. I was right in the middle of the Cusack stand and looked down to the left, and there was only one player in the Dublin half of the field, and it was Evan Comerford. And I just kind of thinking how much Jim McGuinness's imprint has shifted the dial on Gaelic football, and how the revolutionary change, how that was just inconceivable before Donegal changed how people had played. And everything has moved into this notion of transition. And in this, I look at the fact that Galway's shape behind when they do have the ball is fantastic. So Galway conceded no score to Derry on turnovers. Now you can say that that's due to Derry's limitations, but it's also due to the way Galway had snuffed them out. Oisín, is that the way you see this final?
Yeah, but I still don't think that makes it a poor spectacle or a poor final. I think
really,
yeah, I think so. Like, I mean, I have to say, I really enjoyed the last 15 minutes of Dublin Kerry. Like the way that both teams were turning over the ball and just the excitement that brings. So I still think it can be a defensive game, but I still think that doesn't take away sometimes from just how good it can be. And I think for anybody who's involved in coaching, the microscope that players come under as far as what their decision making is. So players in time gone by, a lot of them pick themselves for certain reasons because they filled a certain slot in the team. They had a certain set of skills that were conducive to playing certain roles. I think a lot of it now revolves around what's going on in the top 6 inches as far as your decision making when you're really under pressure, and that was huge, the last day, and it's going to be huge in the final. And I think a lot of time it's nice that sport comes down to that sort of thing rather than just pure brawn. That you have to think your way through the game. I think both teams will have to think their way through the game. And as much as I think, again, that both teams want to have a certain amount of control on the things that happen during the game, like every manager does, the control will be lost at some stage. There's no doubt, because just these two teams have too much firepower for it not to develop into something which will be spectacular, really and truly. And when I say spectacular, I'm not just talking about all out attack. I'm not talking 120 to 120, 121 or something like that. I'm talking about the fact that that the mistakes start to become more plentiful towards the end of the game, and the team that makes the least mistakes will win the game.
What's it like? I'll ask this to the four of you. What's it like to lose an All-Ireland final?
Who you asking?
That answers this, does it, Pod?
Yeah, the silence there. Do you think about it much?
You do.
Yeah.
You do, yeah. You do. Yeah, it's very disappointing, obviously, and I think. It's like any game, really. You, as a group, you're obviously very disappointed. Then the next thing you do is you look at your own performance, whether you were playing or whether you were on the line, and at least if you played well, it gives you some bit of solace in the disappointment. If you've played poorly and the team has lost, or if you're on the line and you've had a bad day and the management have had a bad day and the team lost, it's a very, very disappointing place to be. No, I always tend to process it fairly fast and move on, and you were generally back in with the club as a player, which was I always found it anyway, very therapeutic, and it just moved you on straight away. It was a bit different as a manager because you didn't have the club to go back to. You weren't going back playing straight away, so it was probably a lonelier processing of what happened. But yeah, it is. It's hugely disappointing. It's obviously the worst game that you can lose, and it stays with you. And you probably think about the ones you lost more than the ones you won.
What's the dressing room like, Bryan, after a final loss?
Oh, it's a bad place to be, Paul. Straight out, it's silence, and I think silence says everything. There's just fellas. There's no talking. There's no communication. It just, you hear fella take off his boots and hitting the ground. You'll hear it. You'll hear. It's eerie. It's not nice. It's you give so much to playing football from the point of view of the preparation, the commitment. Missing out on family weddings and friends' weddings and stag parties and fellas going on trips on holidays to the Euros, and you're missing out time with your own family, your partner, your wife, your girlfriend. You're not spending time with them, the family. Don't get me wrong. I wouldn't change anything in my career for it. But it's just a massive commitment, and you're soldier so long with a group of fellas inside in the dressing room that you're best friends with them, and all of a sudden the whole year just comes to an end on one final day in Crow Park. And as Éamonn said, it's the last day of the year. It's the biggest ultimate prize for you, and you just fall short, and it's an empty feeling. And I think even it's the Monday morning for me when you wake up, probably a bit of a hangover on top of it. The Monday morning is probably the worst part of it, to be honest with you. It's how do you pull yourself out of bed? You're thinking about the game. You're thinking about everything. What if I did this? What if we did that? The what ifs kind of come into play. But as Éamonn said, look, to be honest, we're lucky here in Kerry that, and I found it very beneficial to me in 2015 when we lost to Dublin. I had to go back in training Wednesday night because we had an intermediate semi-final the following Sunday against Castle Island or in Killarney. So I more or less had to put on the boots again Wednesday night, go training. And you know what? We went on to win the All Ireland Intermediate Club that year, so probably it wasn't long getting over. You know what I mean? And that's the best thing about going back to the club football. You're brought back to a bang, really. So you'll have some smart comments, obviously, inside the dressing room, which is great to have bring you back down to earth. So from that point of view, it is great. But other than that, losing All Ireland final, yeah, look, it's a horrible feeling. Horrible feeling.
Kevin, do you still think about the one that you lost?
Yeah, I think you think more when you lost than when you won. To be honest, it's just that's in all sports people. I would think, because you're looking back a little bit of regret. But I suppose that the biggest feeling for me is just the season is over, and you know, it's like Bryan said, it's the quietness. It's just disappointment. You don't want to talk to anybody. There's no one around you in the mood to talk anyway. And in the season's over as well, and that's a huge one, because you just everything you've done all year, it's packed away. If you win, you're meeting up during the week. There's little things going on, and it just seems to go on for you. But this is just a dead end with bitter disappointment. It's very difficult after such a long season of hard work. But yeah, you'd think more of the ones you lost than what you win. To be honest, that's the way I'd be in it personally.
Oisín, I'm not going to ask you about 2003 after all this time. I know it's too local. And you have to run into those boys every day, or at least in work.
Try hard not to ever run into them, actually. I just like some of the emotion that I would have was embarrassment, because you're just embarrassed. You don't want to talk to people about it. You don't want people's hard looks. It's a bereavement. It's a process. You have different stages of it. You wake up cringing in the middle of the night and different things like that, and it just hurts, and it hurts badly. And it takes a bit of getting over, and definitely getting back on the pitch and playing a bit of football certainly helps. I always find that actually, when Bryan's talking waking up on the Monday, like players usually end up seeking each other out, because there's a bit of the lad who's with you. You get a sense of where they're at, and there's usually one person within that group who can lift the spirits a little bit. So getting together with the lads who are in a similar mindset, or after going through the exact same thing,
We're going to call the match now. Oisín, who's going to win?
Well, you're going to accuse me of sitting on the fence, but this is not. This is genuinely what I feel. I feel as if Kerry will get the job done eventually, but it might take another. I think it will take another day. Not might. I think it'll take another day.
So at the end of extra time, they'll still be level, and it'll be a replay.
I think so. Something
Bryan
gives me that feeling that there's going to be another day. It's too early. It's too early for the season to be over.
That's a big call.
I'm not just looking for another gig for us guys. That's what people will. That's the first thing that people will accuse us of. But I genuinely think that there's a lot of things, and then we talk about how nervy this. There's a good possibility this is going to be very nervy for a long time. So yeah, and I think both sets of forwards can really punish small little mistakes in either defense. And it's really difficult one to call. So another day out, I think.
It's funny. I've been talking to a few people this week who I really, really respect their views on football. They know it inside out, and they have Kerry winning by 8, 10, 12 points. They think Kerry are going to do a number on Galway in the final. You don't see that?
No, definitely not.
Bryan,
I don't think that Kerry you see that either. Genuinely,
Bryan.
No, look, you don't get into an All Ireland final and sit down and get walked over. You're not a bad team, no matter how bad the championship has been. Or you're in an All Ireland final in Merris, and look, I agree with Oisín. This game it could very well go to extra time. I think the big thing for me is the pace that Kerry are going to play the game at. I think in the first half, Kerry played with a fantastic pace of the game. There was times I can recall where they turned Dublin over on top of the D. Gavin White, Tyke Morley, David Moore and Graham a couple of times, and all of a sudden the transition was fantastic. It was a kick pass. It was a kick pass, and the kick pass I think Sean O'Shea came on the end of it at one stage and kicked the score with his left leg. I think David Clifford got a point as well in the first half. Again, he's down by the Cusick stand side. He cut in back onto his right leg and kicked it over. And I think that all came from kick passing. It came from a very quick turnover where I think they could possibly hurt Galway if they leave David inside 1-on-1 or leave David inside close to goal. If Kerry get a turnover, it can break quick. And I think if they play the game at the pace that they played against Dublin, I think they'll have enough to beat Galway from the point of view. I don't think Galway have played a game at that intensity yet. I think Kevin kind of mentioned that the Derry game was a slow pace. Derry were retreating back. The game was played at slow. It was able to hand passed over and back. There was breaks in the game. Similar to the Armagh game was played at times at a high pace, yes, but I just think if Kerry can play the game at a frantic pace of Division 1 football, I think that's where Kerry played our best football. I think Éamonn will agree to this point of view that when we go at our kicking game and we play the game 100 miles an hour, I think would be very hard to beat. And I think that's the big thing for Kerry. If they can play the game at 100 miles an hour, I think they can win this. But it's going to go down to the wire, to be honest with you. But sorry, the other thing I think is going to have massive bearing is a goal in this game. I think a goal is going to be massive because both teams will try and sit in tight to a certain degree. I think a goal is going to swing this game big time.
Yeah. Kevin?
Yeah, Paul, I 8 to 10 points in the final is a no go, really, to be honest. Any finals, it was one too many that way. Bryan hit the pace side of it there. I just look at will they throw in a full forward on top of Galway for a while and try one or two in there and how they deal with that. How will Kerry deal with the Galway defensive system? Will they get frustrated? Will Galway bring it down to a low pace that they won't like it, and they bring it down the line that they put a doubt in the Kerry minds, having to carry the favouritism? There's a load of unanswered questions here because there is no line of form other than the Mayo match. That's the only line I can see. And again, you have on days and off days, but I see this going down really, really tight. I think Galway can sneak it on the back of staying in the game for long periods and coming down the stretch. If they do, like Galway are fairly well set up to stop Kerry from counter-attacking. And that sweeper inside, who's going to mark Damien Comer, I think that's going to be huge to stop the ball going to Damien Comer. If he has a good day, Galway have a great chance. So I'm going to give Galway a slight nod, providing that they stay tight the whole first half.
Okay. Éamonn?
Yeah, hard to disagree with anything that's been said except for Kevin's slight nod there, Paul. I think the lads have it all covered. I'm expecting a very cagey, tight game. Lot of nerves. I think probably something that Galway will be conscious of is their slow start and slow finish. They've been, caught towards the end of games, and they've also started games quite slowly against both Derry and Armagh. So I think they'll be conscious of that, keeping themselves in the game early on, sitting in, making it very tight. Paddy Shea used to have a great expression for us coming up the big games. He'd be talking about being cautiously confident. So what he meant was that you're cautious of the opposition, you're very respectful of the opposition, but you're also confident in your own ability and you're confident in the group and the work we've done together. So I would be cautiously confident this week. I think that it's going to be tight. I wouldn't be surprised if it needed extra time or the extra day out, as Oisín says. But I think the Kerry bench can be a factor in deciding it late on. I just think, even looking back at the hurling final last week, there was absolutely nothing in that game, and the quality of the Limerick subs that came in, helped get them over the line. And I think possibly the quality that Kerry subs, Kevin mentioned it earlier, that Padraic, Joyce and the lads don't tend to use the bench that much. And I think in an All-Ireland final, 80 plus minutes from 17, 18 players is a big ask, whereas a few fellas coming on, adding legs, adding that bit of football finish, it could be the deciding factor. Very tight, though. I'm expecting it to be very tight.
Yeah, so we'll know.
What do you think, Paul?
Sorry, Oisín. The line's gone really bad there. I can't quite hear you. I think so. I I thought Dublin were going to win the All Ireland. They were the team who I thought, so I'm wrong straight up from the beginning. In terms of Galway, I've tipped Galway all year to beat Mayo, to beat Roscommon, and to win their quarterfinal, semi-final. And I'm kind of stuck now in that I'm not sure. I think the questions about Kerry are really, really interesting ones. I think they have the two outstanding players on the field in Sean O'Shea and David Clifford. But I also think that they have some players who I think will struggle in an All-Ireland final. So I'm going to tentatively say Galway by a couple of points. So that's, and I was in tune last week, so I'm hugely coloured by the experience of being in tune with Leo Moore.
You've been
I was down there. So I think we could have a hostage situation. Is the way I'd look at it. We're finished there. Thank you to Larry Ryan for running this podcast, to Raf Rocca, to Jack Neville, to Tony Lean, and to everyone at Examiner Sport. Thanks to Renault for their support. A huge thanks to Oisín, McConville, to Bryan Sheehan, to Éamonn Fitzmaurice, and to Kevin Walsh for joining us today. Beimid Harnash Galua.
Thanks to our sponsors Renault, the Renault Capture, the versatile compact family SUV.
You're still the one I run to, the one that I belong to. You're still the one I want for life.
A grain of rice, a grain of rice is going to tip the scale. Just remember that, lad.
There's a small bit of a needle there.
Now, come on, Mayo, you've got to get Andy Moran into the game.
Listen back to Eden, and now they're really rolling.